Hey everybody, Jason here, and just a couple of announcements. First and foremost, you know that we are on a little bit of a break. We are going to be coming back to you with brand new episodes on January 30th with a special guest who I am teasing to you guys and will let you know the morning of, but I promise you it is absolutely huge, and we are so excited to have this person coming to you. It's going to be absolutely amazing. So January 30th, season 3 of HATM kicks off then. Also, if you want to support this whole thing, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians at the movies. Memberships start as low as $7. There are a bunch of episodes already available, early episodes that are available to you right now. So if you want to help support the mission, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians at the movies. Now on with the show. Hey, everybody, if you just heard, if you're just listening in, you know that we're on break right now. We are going to be coming back on January 30th. So we are releasing some older episodes, and this is actually one of the very first episodes we ever did, talking about the film Lincoln, which was one of the very first films we ever did on the Watch Party 6 years ago. And to do this episode, I brought in two of my amazing friends, two of the best, absolute phenomenal scholars in the country. I'm talking about my great friends, Lindsay Chervinsky and Megan Kate Nelson. If you know anything, if you've turned on the news recently, you've seen both of them. You'll see Lindsay Chervinsky. She is a presidential historian. She's the executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library. She is also the author of The Cabinet, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution, as well as Making the Presidency, John Adams, and the Precedents that Forged the Republic. If you turn on the news right now, Lindsay is on your television. She is amazing. She is just an absolute wrecking ball of historical knowledge and absolutely killing it out there. And she's been on the podcast multiple times. She's a great friend of mine, as well as my great friend, Megan Kate Nelson, who you know as well from everything. It seems like if you turn on the TV, you'll see Megan talking about the West, the Civil War. And this is because she is the author of multiple books, including most recently Saving Yellowstone, Exploration and Preservation and Reconstruction America. Before that, she wrote The Three-Cornered War, The Union, the Confederacy, and Native Peoples, and the Fight for the West, and a bunch of other stuff. When I tell you guys that Lindsay and Megan are just two of my favorite people, I'm not exaggerating. They're absolutely amazing. And this is one of our early pods. This was a great discussion. In fact, if I recall correctly, as we were recording this podcast, my power went out. I was in Florida at the time, and they just took the lead and kept rolling with it. And I came back in and realized, as you'll hear, that this podcast and the fate of HATM was changed forever. So this is a really fun conversation about a really important historical film, about a really important historical presidency. And I felt like in this time and era, with the new inauguration coming up, it was time to really see and talk about maybe a different president, one from Kentucky and not from Illinois. So sit back and relax, because Lincoln is next on Historians at the Movies podcast. Megan, you outnumber me in cats 2-1. I don't know who's winning that, because mine is like more than I can handle.
Well, you both outnumber me in dogs.
To be fair, I don't actually have my dogs here, so I keep them at like another house.
Part-time dogs.
Yeah, I've got a stake in them, you know.
Yeah,
but Lindsay has full ownership, like that I see all the time.
I have a full-time dog and then some. He does not lack for personality, needs, demands, noises, opinions, any of the above. Megan has experienced this firsthand. When he decides something is happening, that is happening.
Yeah, he's like 150% dog. He's extra dog.
Yeah,
he's super extra in all ways.
I see him on Instagram. He's very busy, just nonstop.
He is. He has a lot to say. He has a lot to do. He has a lot to, he has two speeds. Either it's 100% or not at all. And so he approaches life that way, whether it's at 6 o'clock in the morning, howling at the groundhog that has the audacity to live outside our house, or sleeping. So I think, that's a good lesson. We could all approach life that way. It's either 100% or not
or
at all.
Sleeping. Yeah. I mean, the cats are pretty much 100% sleep, except when they want snacks. And then they're very loud.
But they're very pretty.
They're very pretty. They're not very bright, but they're very pretty. So that's, the best we could hope for with the two of them. And we have lost Jason, I believe. He has gone beyond. Maybe he has gone beyond. There he is.
Okay. We are on a roll. We have just continued.
We've done your segue for you.
Oh, I was like, I had no idea what was going on. This first time I've had that issue. I guess it's from this storm.
We were wondering if the hurricane had hit you while we were actually on the line with you, which would have been very dramatic.
Yeah, that would have been good, right? And then there would be like a metaphor for what Lincoln was.
That's doing. Right. The storm. You're like on the boat in the storm, like in the dream.
Well, a recent Lincoln book that shall not be named starts with "The storm came from the south." So we are not the first, nor I suspect the last, to think of this metaphor.
And let's not use it again.
I am wearing my Lincoln-related shirt today.
Excellent.
Very good. Megan, do you have a Lincoln bobblehead behind you?
I do.
I love it.
Here he is.
We are thematically on point.
All right.
I'll put him right here. He'll be our little spirit animal. Wait, where can he go?
He's our mascot.
There we go.
All right. What state are you devout Lincoln Illinoisans? Is that where you associate Lincoln with?
Yes.
I mean, for the most part. I mean, I have talked a fair bit. I haven't really written about Lincoln in the West, but I talk about it a fair bit to public audiences and in other formats. And Lincoln really identified both his kind of Kentucky and his Illinois experiences as being Western, both of those things.
Sure, yeah.
And I think I don't know, you can tell us, Jason, is Kentucky in the South or is it in the West?
Megan, how does our conception of Lincoln change if we think of him as a Westerner?
Listen to that.
Right. I would tell you that culturally, Kentucky is very much part of the South, at least parts of Kentucky. Kentucky's that classic border state, right? Where it's also, I always find it fascinating that Lincoln and Jefferson Davis are both from a border state. There's so much metaphor there, right? I'm from Western Kentucky. We're culturally very much part of the South, right? South of the Ohio River. I grew up Kentucky, Western Tennessee, very much, is what we'd refer to as the Upper South. And whenever I allow my accent to come out, it's very much an Upper South accent. But also Kentucky, like every other place, has its own regionalism. So the farther east you go, the more north you go, I would say culturally, as far as at least in the context of the war, right? Because I don't consider Appalachia as part of the South. Appalachia is its own thing, and J.D. Vance is not part of that space.
He's not part of any space we want to discuss right now.
The best thing I can say about Ohio is that the state of Kentucky owns your river.
I mean, Kentucky, though, what's interesting about Kentucky is that in the antebellum period, Kentucky was the jumping off point for everywhere else, basically to the west of there. Like people moving into the Midwest and the upper Midwest, people moving into Texas, people moving into the Rocky Mountain West. And that's why it's an interesting state, because it was on the leading edge of the quote unquote frontier for a little bit there, kind of in the founding era. So it is a border state, not only between North and South, but I think you could make an argument for it being a border state between the East and West. And especially during this period, and especially when Lincoln is growing up. And it was very much a part of his electoral politics, this image of him as a Western man, with the log splitting and like all of that.
Part of his cabinet politics too. We're going to pull it into the movie.
This is very exciting.
And certainly he's not the first Westerner, right? Dare I bring in...
Yes, he had the first cabinet secretary from west of the Mississippi and had very important border state representation, as well as like hardcore, New York and that kind of thing. But this was very much part of his presidential politics as well as his personal identity.
Oh, I was just saying, like he knew the political power of those states. And the incoming territories, right? I mean, he cut his teeth in all the fights over slavery in the Western territories. So he knew how important it was.
Is he borrowing off of Jackson's success at all as far as the idea of the West as during his rise? I mean, because, Jackson's, one of those guys I consider as far as, this Westerner who kind of rises to fame and power and so forth. I'm not a Lincoln guy. I mean, as much as I want to like bravo Kentucky, that's all I got. We're tall. We have beards.
Do you wrestle? Do you openly wrestle in the street, Jason?
It depends on how much wine I have later on. I avoid plays, so just like Lincoln should have.
Very wise. Very wise.
But it's I kind of wonder about that. Like, there are obviously other folks before Lincoln who were playing on this West, who identify with the West, and there seems to be a power rising out there, by that point in time.
I don't know.
Or established. Really.
I mean, I think it was more about the common man, wherever he may be from, that ties him to Andrew Jackson, and a complete disregard of Native peoples. But we can discuss that later, the two of them. But yeah, I mean, I think that what you see, that some of the most charming and effective parts in the film are the times where he's spinning out these stories, and when Stanton is like, "No, sir, no more stories." Like they're so sick of it, right? Like it's clearly it's kind of part of his shtick, but it's also it's deliberate, and but it also seems to come from, he's always making himself laugh telling these stories, which is just a charming thing. But that is a very common man type of strategy among a lot of presidents. And I will say that among the recent presidents, the one who did that and still does that really, really well is W. Like that guy, born into privilege, so Ivy Leaguer, but his sense of humor is exactly in that vibe. He has a real Lincoln vibe in his turn to storytelling, to explain decisions and to think about politics, and it's extremely effective.
And very much marketed himself like as a commoner, right? As a Texan, right? I mean, completely eschewing the whole idea of his privilege and the family and dynasty. We don't even call him Bush. We call him W, right? I mean, it's the reality is like, I remember we'd see him out working, quite literally mending fences.
Right, on the ranch. Yes.
And so on the ranch, as one does when you are, a president or a presidential, candidate.
Clearly.
I want to ask you, before we jump back into the movie, when I reached out to both of you, I was like, hey, what movie you guys want to do? And you were both like, Lincoln. Why Lincoln? Like, why this movie?
Well, I think I had the idea of it because I was trying to find something that merged our respective work. And so obviously I'm a presidential historian, and Megan has primarily written about the 19th century and most recently, especially about Reconstruction. And so I thought that it would be a fun and interesting way to blend our different sensibilities. And I know Megan has done a lot of writing, but also talking about movies and that genre. And so this seemed like a particularly fun one to try and tackle.
And we should say it's pretty close right now to its 10th anniversary. Like it was released in November of 2012. So when Lindsay first suggested it, I was like, not only is it a great suggestion, again, because it bridges our interest areas, but it's also, as we know, anniversaries, interesting moments to kind of reassess and say, like, how has this movie aged? Like, has it in the time since, when we've had a lot of attention to emancipation in other forms, right? We have a lot of Harriet Tubman shows. We have a lot of, we have this new movie coming out called Emancipation with Will Smith. Yeah. And so this is very interesting. So I was interested to see what would happen when we went back to revisit it now, whether we would think about it differently than we did at the moment. Because it was really lauded by a lot of historians. There was then a wave of criticism, but I think most historians, I mean, Spielberg even won a prize from, who was it? The AHA or the Gilder Lehrman or someone gave him a prize for movie making and for public history, because the movie is so grounded in historical research and was actually a hit film. Like it won awards, but people also went to see it, which is tremendous.
I remember when it was gestating, like I remember hearing these things about like, hey, Spielberg's going to make a Lincoln movie and it's going to star Liam Neeson, right? Neeson was attached to this film for the longest time. And I love Liam Neeson, but I can't see anyone else other than Daniel Day-Lewis in this role. I cannot see it. Do you remember your like first takes on this? Either of you, as far as like your first takes on this film when you saw it, like what were your initial impressions?
Well, I have to say, yeah, I generally, if it's not in my very specific wheelhouse, I generally don't approach these things with a super critical lens. I generally enjoy that. I approach them of like, did I enjoy it? Did I enjoy the acting? Did I enjoy the film creation? Did I enjoy the art of it? Now, one of the few sort of exceptions to that, actually, in terms of like in terms of historians being laudatory and then being critical, was Hamilton. It's obviously very much in my wheelhouse, but I adored it from the very beginning. But I think that's partly because of especially the textural accuracy with most of the things, but I digress. So I think when I first saw it, I was just kind of blown away by the nuance and the detail and everything from like his face to the detail in the White House, which I now know based on sort of my previous positions is actually quite accurate in terms of their interior decor and their design and things like that. When I sat back down to rewatch it for this, I was trying to bring a more critical lens, but I'm one of those historians that is perfectly happy to watch National Treasure, and I'm completely happy to watch The Patriot. Are they like historically accurate? Of course not. They're ridiculous, but I can still enjoy them. So I'm probably not the best critic of these things.
Well, and I should say, so I had been hearing about this project. So this is, Lindsay, I think I told you about this connection, but I didn't tell you the specifics. One of my very good friends from college was the lead researcher on Team of Rivals. And so she was working, and Doris, sold the option to Spielberg before the book was even written. So she was writing. I find this amazing. I only got this from one source, so perhaps I should corroborate it before I state it as fact. But I heard
absolutely not. We do have a very low bar here. We're absolutely not. We're not. There are no footnotes. Yeah,
there are no fact checkers on this.
Absolutely not. We heard this on the internet.
Okay, good. So I heard a rumor that Doris was sending Spielberg chapters as she was writing them. Which, from her editor's point of view, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine that they would let her do that, because once it gets out of your control, whatever. But it may be just because she's DKG, she can do what she wants. But so my friend, after they finished the entire book, the original idea that Spielberg had was to actually make a movie about the entirety of Lincoln's presidency. And yeah. Okay, so listeners can't see, but Lindsay's making this face like, oh, and it's true. There's no way to do that. It's impossible. And this is one of the challenges, right? I mean, like Lindsay, you write about presidents, you're writing a book about a presidency right now. There is no way to convey that much detail and
really, really
complexity,
hard.
In 2.5 hours. Oh yeah. You have to pick something. So my friend she went with Doris to go meet with Spielberg. As one does.
Right.
As one does. And after the book was pretty much written, and they had written up a couple of kind of treatments for him, sort of possible ideas for him about what the movie could be. And they went in and she got to pitch him a couple of things. And she said, what was interesting about him is he looked totally bored during most of the pitching until she started describing the very beginning of the war and how Lincoln had, called for troops to come and protect DC, and no one came for a week. While everyone was mustering and getting on trains and coming down, and the U.S. troops from Massachusetts are stopped in Baltimore. There's this huge fracas, and it was not until she said, but when they finally arrived, the soldiers started to bivouac on the floor of the Senate. And apparently that was the moment where Spielberg kind of sat up and was like, oh, tell me more about that. And so it was such a great story because it reveals that what filmmakers are interested in is not what historians are interested in, right? Like necessarily, like they want a good story. They want something with visual resonance. They want something that is dramatic to watch unfolding, which is why it's so interesting then, he chose kind of three actually sort of sets, right? There's the White House set, the Congress set, and then the battlefield set, basically. Like those are, there's some other scenes that happen in other places, but those are the three major ones. And most of the action is in the White House and in Congress for good reason, because this is the very tightly focused. It's only like a paragraph or two in Team of Rivals, right? So it's a very specific moment in his presidency. But my friend just came back from that and was like, yeah, like filmmakers think about story and they think about history and they think about these kinds of things in a very different way than the rest of us.
Can we as historians like pull from that though? I mean, it's like, because we seem to be caught in this dialogue recently of like how to write history, or certainly those familiar with what's going on in the AHA, the American Historical Association, these arguments over what history is, this idea of where in time history is taking place, all of these things, and for me, when I talk to other people, it's like, oh, I like history, but so much of it's just bad. People can't. It's like brilliant people talking these things. I kind of wonder. As historians, can we pull from like maybe that director's? I mean, Megan, you were just talking. You love to write. I've got your books. Right. So, I mean, your thoughts on? I mean, what are you looking for when you're trying to tell? I mean, I think of myself as a storyteller before I think of myself as a historian. Mm-hmm. Are there ways to pull from that idea?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I take a lot of inspiration from TV and film. I mean, I like to joke. So my dad is like a huge history nerd, and my mother is obsessed with TV and film. And so I like came by this completely naturally. Like I have deep interest in both things. And so historical films are always interesting to me because I want to see how they actually deal with the historical detail. And for me as a historian, like I'm not only inspired by the way people tell stories. So do they do flashbacks? Do they do multi-perspective? Like who are we actually seeing? What person is the heart of the story? And I think that, for this movie, obviously Lincoln is the heart of the story, which is why we're seeing emancipation from his point of view, which is one of the critiques of the film, right? Is that all of the Black characters are pretty passive. You're not seeing a lot of engagement, or people, there are references to men and women kind of self-emancipating, but there's not a kind of through line there or dominant story there, which is why it'll be interesting to see this new film Emancipation and see how that, are there any politicians in that movie at all? Unlikely. But I also like to think in terms of setting scenes and sort of, and Lindsay and I have talked about this too. Like when you're writing narrative history, instead of kind of chasing down the 47th source that tells you the same thing about a certain moment, you're chasing down like, okay, what floor of this building did they meet in? Like, did it have windows? What was there a carpet? If so, is there any way to find out what that carpet looked like? Like, and you spend your rabbit holes kind of become different when you write narrative history. Your rabbit holes become about these kinds of details and finding out exactly where someone's house was, for example, in a town. So you're collecting maps and you're collecting census records and you're collecting all of these things. Like, is there any photographic evidence of what this actually looked like? Because, one of my goals is to set a reader down on the ground next to these historical actors as they're moving through space and time. And I think that's what movies and TV try to do also.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think, if we think about what the filmmaker or an artist is trying to do, is they're trying to engage the visual part of the human brain, which is the most base part because we, could see things before we had the written word. And so, and as, babies, we learned how to talk by seeing things rather than first learning how to read or write. And so, when people ask, like, how did you get into history? I was a voracious reader, but I often think that some of the moments that were the most compelling were when I had the opportunity to go visit actual sites, because you can see how people were existing in this space. You can see what their houses looked like, what their clothes looked like, what it maybe smelled like or felt like. Or I have this picture of me when I was like 5 wearing armor at Jamestown, and it's ridiculous, but I remember it and I still have the picture. And so I think with our writing, the scene setting is so important because not only does this space affect what happened. I write about this a lot in The Cabinet, that the space that they were meeting in was small and cramped and hot, and they didn't particularly like each other towards the end. And so if you're stuck in a meeting with someone for 3 hours with a person you detest 5 days a week, like, that's not going to go very well. And so the physical space matters a great deal for the events that happen, but it also allows the reader to kind of visualize and see what's happening. And I think that is so essential. And there is a part of academic writing that sort of, I don't want to say frowns on that kind of thing, but views it as less than like theory or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with writing something that people want to read. There's nothing wrong with writing a story that is compelling, and it can still have a contribution, even if it isn't based first and foremost on theory.
Well, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Historians of Movies is critically anti-theory in all shapes, forms, sizes. I will not have it anywhere near me.
Theory is where joy goes to die.
Oh my God. I don't even understand. I won't even pretend to understand historical theory. And someone out there listening this way, I like this. No, okay, you don't. You're just pretending to. No, absolutely not. Okay, so we're talking about shapes and like the idea of like where these places are, and so trying to paint as accurate a picture as we can. Is that important with a film like Lincoln, as far as like when we get down to like what kind of curtains were on the wall, or like how important is historical accuracy in these kinds of films? Lincoln is not National Treasure, which is not taking itself seriously, but Lincoln very much is, right? And it's kind of funny, Lindsay, you brought that up because National Treasure being the first thing we did on HATM, Lincoln being the second one, right? We went for a radical tonal shift in the first 2 films. Does it matter with Lincoln? I mean, what I guess maybe the point is like, what's Lincoln doing right here, and why is that important?
I guess I am looking for sort of like a critical mass of accuracy. I'm looking for enough that I don't feel that the details, if it's a film that's trying to take itself seriously, so it's trying to present a fairly accurate picture of what that world looked like, I want the details to be consistent enough that it doesn't pull me out of it, or it's not jarring, or it's not somehow discordant. So I don't particularly care if like a dress was indigo or a dark shade of purple. That doesn't really bother me as long as it was sort of consistent for the time. So I wouldn't expect them to be wearing a neon pink dress, for example. That would feel out of place.
Definitely not with
So I think that for me, at least, that is what I'm looking for. Now, I think other historians might have a different sort of level that they apply, but I'm looking for something that doesn't pull from the story or pull from the overall picture. What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I don't know what platform you guys use to watch the movie, but I watched it on Amazon, and they have the little things that come up, the trivia bits. And one of them was like, if you look at this band that's playing, someone's playing a clarinet that did not exist in 1860. And I was like, I don't care. Like, that's just not like the historians whose only bone to pick is about accuracies that are either that specific about the set or super specific accuracies about people in the room, things like that. I just think that's the most boring approach to the discussion of this form of popular culture. For me, what's most important is that the film is historically credible, so that like you believe what is happening in the film. It can be and Steven Spielberg's burden was heavy. Like, Lincoln is our most revered president. He, said amazing things. Daniel Day-Lewis had an incredible burden, like to have to play someone of that immense drama, like just that internal drama and that just, his significance in American history. And so they had to get those details right. And I think that they did. And they definitely did in such a way. Like, did he and his wife did Lincoln and Mary have like that exact fight? Like, who cares? That fight was friggin' fantastic, right? Like, it was...
Well, and they definitely fought about the subject.
Yes.
So even if they didn't fight about it on that day or with that exact language, like, that we know they fought about the subject.
And and it was just so well done. Yeah. I mean, it was just so well done. And you could see both of their characters just out there, and they were talking over each other and fighting and screaming. And it was just that part of the depiction, like his personal life, his role as a father, his role as a husband, that I think was also, it rang true as just because I think one of the hardest things to do, and I think, Lindsay, you may talk about this too, when you talk about the cabinet and you do all of your other kind of forms of public speaking. But, one of the goals is to try and convince people that people in the past did not just live in the 2D black and white photograph that we're used to seeing them in, right? Like, they were people. They were people like us in many particulars, in that they were immensely flawed. They had all kinds of emotions. They had, they were eating and drinking and bathing and pooping and doing all the things that humans do, right? And to convey someone living a full life in 3D is, it's hard to do as historians, because you have to pull together all of this stuff so that they're just not a name on the page who said something that proves your argument, right? Like, you are creating a vision of a life. And I think that is what Lincoln does best, is to actually create Lincoln as a person. And the only times where the film fell flat for me were the parts where they were trying too hard to do something more. Like the opening scene, which I was just like, that was just like a Tony Kushner, like, stage set. Like, I don't even know what was happening. That was like a play within a play. And I was like, not happy about it. And I think the ending also of the film was really rushed. It just like going back and forth. I would have been super happy if they had just stopped the film where he was walking away down the hall.
That was the cut. That's where the cut. He ends with the line where he's just like, I very much do not want to go, blah, blah, blah. All you had to, and see him kind of limping, that kind of that very frail man. We did not need to see the assassination.
No.
At all. I think this weakest part of the...
What they chose to do, I thought, was actually incredibly cruel, which is that they didn't show him getting shot. They showed Tad hearing about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I hadn't remembered that actually from my first viewing, because I was reviewing the film in 2012 for Civil War Monitor. So I was taking notes in the movie theater as I was watching, which is hilarious. You should see them because it was dark, right? So some of my notes look like those 19th century letters where like things are written over other things. And you can't quite tell. There's junior mints like smeared on the page, like and just salt. And
it's a true archival document.
It is a true archival document. But I think maybe I was just like, wait, why isn't the movie over? And then I think I maybe just kind of glossed over the Tad thing. But when I watched it again this time, I was like, oh my God, like, why?
Yeah, mean.
So mean. And that kid actor did a great job, but I was like, that is terrible.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well, and then the last piece I think is, the three of us know what the last scene is because we can put it in the context and we know the language, but it is asking a lot of every viewer to know that is the second inaugural, and that is before all of this has taken place. That is asking a lot of a viewer to be able to put that historical context in place. And I understand that it's his, some of his most famous language, and it's the greatest inaugural ever. And the bar has been set impossibly high. But I think that, to your point, the film should have ended earlier. If I may, I just want to circle back to one thing you said that I think is really incredibly powerful. when you're talking about the life that he created, the element of that to me that stuck out the most was when Lincoln was undoing Mary's stays. And it's like starts the scene. And that's one of those details where it's probably never written down, because who would ever write down that he helped her with her stays that night? And so it's one of those things that you could never footnote. But it also is such a human element, and was probably such a part of, you know, if couples were on decent speaking terms, was a part of most marriages, but is also incredibly sort of timeless. I mean, I've asked my husband to help me with the back of a dress or to help me with a necklace or something. It is such a intimate moment that is such a timeless human experience, and is one of those things where it's really hard to create in writing if you're worried about citing every detail, but the film does so beautifully.
Exactly. Well, Jason, what do you think about that issue?
Well, I think I actually kind of want to go back to the assassination, because I'm kind of wondering why we, with Daniel Day-Lewis being such a noted method actor, I'm wondering if maybe the reason why we don't see the assassination was to keep Daniel Day-Lewis from insisting on being shot in preparation for the film.
Actually shot.
Yeah, I'm wondering, he's like, well, maybe not in the head, but can you get me in the leg, or something, something along those lines. I totally agree with both of you. I think that, I think the best thing the film does for me as far as Lincoln goes is it humanizes him as a husband and a father who is trying to wrestle with being a husband and father in the midst of all of this other turmoil, right? And you see how all of those things affect, his actions, right? Just like in any of our lives, our own personal lives affect, maybe a grander scale or whatever it is, because we always think about Lincoln as the president, right? But we don't, tend not to think of him as the father, but certainly him as the father or him as the husband. Those other roles certainly inform the decisions that he makes, and they humanize him, and he's certainly not perfect. And, later on, I'm going to ask you about your favorite presidents. Inevitably, someone's going to, well, this person said that. No one's perfect. The fact that people accomplish greatness or evil or anything like that in light of their humanity is what makes them to be, particular of note, whether they're good, bad, or somewhere in between. I can't see this film without Daniel Day-Lewis, but I'm kind of wondering about casting as far as, did you have any other particular casting here that you really just chewed on, that you liked or that you didn't like? Or anything that maybe really stuck out to you as far as this particular film?
Well, the first thing that I texted Megan when I was watching it is, holy bananas, this cast is stacked. It is the most absurd cast I've probably ever seen, both in terms of like their previous work, but then also what they have done since. So for example, like a relatively bit player is Walter Goggins, who has gone on to have a phenomenal career. And I mean, even people like, there was one guy, his name was Hal Holbrook, and he was, just like he was Francis Blair. And I was like, where do I know him from? Where do I know him from? Where do I know him from? He was Albie Duncan in West Wing. And he's like one of my favorite tiny little bit characters that comes back again and again in West Wing. But so it blew my mind that the cast is the way that it is. The one that I think is perhaps, I think he's so good in a lot of stuff, but I love his depiction of the true cantankerous grumpiness of Thaddeus Stevens, which is played by Tommy Lee Jones. I just think it's the silences that he employs are so powerful. And I'm always a sucker for an old grump.
Well, you are writing a book about Adams.
I was going to say, like, think about the people. Well, I think my dog's name is John Quincy Dog Adams. So, like, I am obviously a sucker for this. I have a type.
Yeah, all of them were just gems, right? I didn't have any problems with any of the casting. I thought they were all tremendous. James Spader, still one of my favorite scenes, him running. He's running. And like, and then like Nicolay and Hay, I thought were perfectly cast. We have Jeremy Strong. I had forgotten that he was in it as Nicolay. And I will watch anything with Lee Pace in it. And I had forgotten that he, was there as the like kind of nasty Democrat, pro-slavery, pro-peace, like, asshole. But he was still charming, and I enjoyed watching him, as I do in everything. But I mean, they were all so good. And you could see them all because so many of those actors also are just total scenery chewers. But Tony Kushner wrote scenery chewing stuff for them. Like every single thing, they were just all trying to just compete with each other about who could say the nastiest thing in the most eloquent possible way.
Oh, they are swinging for the fences. It's like they're sizing each other up. I'm just like, let's go. And you're absolutely right. And it's, so Spader, right? His characters are, his character in the film, with a film this heavy, you need levity wherever you can find it. We talked a little bit about Lincoln's jokes and so forth, but the timing and the way the narrative devices and the way that some of that, the way that, let's say Spader brings that to life is, I mean, just the running scene, absolutely. Just,
and I thought they did a very good job also with Sally Field, and in conveying the sense that she actually knew exactly what was going on, that she was politically canny. I mean, she's the one who says to him, you can't send these 3 lackeys out there to try and give them post office, appointments. You have to go out there. They love you. Yeah. And even if they don't love your politics, they love you. You have to do it. You have to go and convince them. And he does. He manages to convince a few of them. And it's because she gets him to do it and kind of gets him to see that needs to be his job now. I mean, I think, and this is where, many historians were criticizing the film, and I think these criticisms are completely justified. The only awkward acting was whenever Lincoln was engaging with any of the Black actors and the Black characters in the film. Those were the only super awkward moments, again, because I think Tony Kushner and Spielberg were trying to make those moments very weighty and important and symbolic in a way that Daniel Day-Lewis gets on the ground with Tad and is looking at the glass plate negatives, the Gardner photographs, which is a very nice detail. And then kind of picks him up off the ground in this lovely kind of intimate fatherly moment. That wasn't awkward at all. But then there are these other interactions where just I was like, oh man.
Okay. Counterpoint though.
Ooh.
Counterpoint.
Exciting.
We have some descriptions of Lincoln's interactions with leaders in the Black community in DC and abolitionists. And based on the descriptions, they read pretty awkward. Because he was sometimes a reluctant ally, is the awkwardness, if uncomfortable, accurate?
I mean, that's a good point. And maybe what I needed was more of those moments so that you could see that more strongly. So that it wasn't just the here's this awkward thing where people are quoting the Gettysburg Address at each other.
Placeholder.
Weird, and then a weird interaction with Elizabeth Keckley, on the steps of the White House, where she's kind of not really expressing.
I would have liked to have seen, because we know based on the record that she actually had a pretty big impact on Mary Lincoln's thinking. So that would have been really powerful, I think. Because she really pushed Mary to sort of be on board with some of these things. That would, I think, have been a better use of her scene time. Oh, but I have one other thing about Mary that I wanted to say. Do we think that there is, I mean, to your point, I think they did a really good job of showing her complexity and her depth and her realness. She was not just a shrew or a crazy woman. She obviously had all of these unique qualities. And I think they did a good job of showing that it must have been very difficult to be married to Lincoln sometimes, especially during the war. I don't know that anyone other than Sally Field could have played that role opposite of Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, she matches him blow for blow in a way that is remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Meryl Streep, but I can't.
Yes, that's the only other person
who would disappear into the role, because she really did disappear.
Yeah.
And you just stopped thinking of her as Sally Field, really. And of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, completely unrecognizable. I mean, part of it was his face paint and like all the prosthetics and the hair, which was amazing. The great line about his barber like killing himself. It's just like, what? But yeah, I mean, the way that all of them actually, even if they had just one or two lines, the way that all of those actors were able to fully embody those people. But yeah, I mean, I would have liked to see Frederick Douglass in there talking to Lincoln, which he did do. Like it, I think it would have been helpful in framing his thinking kind of moving along a little bit, because he was reluctant, and when he is saying to Elizabeth Keckley, like, I don't know you, like, I don't know anything about the Black community. I don't know what they're, I can theoretically think about them and freedom as a political act or a theory, moral theory, but like, what is it like to be a Black person on the ground? Like, he clearly doesn't know, which is good for him to admit. But yeah, those interactions just seem too few and too far between. And the real story was this fight in Congress, which, it's rooted in reality. Like, this is where the decisions were getting made. And you can only tell that one story. And then, you have to leave a lot of other stuff on the cutting room floor, like, which I'm sure they did.
Did either of you have a favorite scene in this film?
I mean, my historian of destruction brain, of course, loved from Ruined Nation, all the battlefield scenes and the pit filled with amputated limbs. Spielberg is pretty good with battles. He had Saving Private Ryan, and he doesn't shy away from that. And I thought that was good. But as for the rest of it, I mean, the screaming fight between him and Mary was probably my favorite.
I'm sure my favorite will not surprise either of you. I love the the cabinet scenes are phenomenal. When we talk, just in general, because when we talk about sort of the accuracy of the film, the other thing that this does a great job of doing is showing the heart of Lincoln's political genius. And absolutely, storytelling was part of it, and humor was part of it. And he made fun of himself all the time as a way of lightening the mood or trying to deliver, a particularly tough decision. If he was self-deprecating, he was very friendly. He did go visit his secretaries. He did refer to Gideon Wells, this old Neptune. So all of these things were accurate. He did have regular meetings with them. The office looked pretty consistent with what they said. So I love all of that detail. And his political genius was so unusual that I am very appreciative that it is captured in this way. The one that really struck me was later on when he's talking about trying to figure out what to do with the 13th Amendment and peace and the legality of this decision. And I think this would not have occurred to me when I first saw the film 10 years ago. But in the particular moment we're in now, the struggle he is having is, what is okay to do in the name of preserving the Union or preserving democracy? And is it okay to break the law? Is it okay to go beyond the bounds of morality? Is it okay to take on awesome power with sort of tyrannical bent in order to do this for the greater good? And that debate, the circular logic of what he's trying to figure out, both was a circular logic of what the actual Lincoln was trying to do. But those questions about what does it take to preserve the democracy, and at what point have you gone so far that you've destroyed the thing you're trying to save, strikes me as a very relevant one for our current moment.
Yeah. And how do you make those decisions, and what's driving it? Is it morality? Is it venal politics? Is it corruption? Is it, trying to have this larger purpose, he has to pass the 13th Amendment to win the war, but passing the 13th Amendment could destroy peace talks, but then the peace talks could destroy the passage of the amendment, and like all of this nitty gritty of political decision making. I think that's exactly right. It rings really true, especially in this moment.
The other thing that I love about those moments is, in terms of the cabinet deliberations, one of the great things about Lincoln's leadership, and this is true of all the great presidents that we have had, they are not afraid to surround themselves with people who tell them they are wrong. they're not afraid to be told no. Sometimes they listen and sometimes they don't. And obviously one person is really tasked with making that decision. But I love that they depict the cabinet secretaries of, going toe to toe with him and screaming at him and telling he's wrong and trying to get him to do things in a different way. And that relationship was very accurate, but also so essential to the type of leadership that the nation does require.
For me, the film, I kept seeing this theme of time, right? We know what's going to happen to Lincoln. We know when it's going to happen. And, this idea, when he gives that speech, with the cabinet where he's like, now, it's just underscoring this has to happen. It has to happen right now. I don't know that we can appreciate just how horrible of a situation the country was in during this abysmal war. That lived experience of this. I mean, the man was literally trying to hold the country together and having to act, we were talking about having to debate the own legality of his inactions just in light of, will this save the country or not? I think we've had other presidents that would have been good in other times. I know we've had presidents who he seems to be the guy who was there at the time he had to be, for American history. I mean, I just feel like I can't see anybody else in that role holding the country together like he did. And certainly wasn't him by himself, right? We talk about the cabinets. We talk about, the people who were fighting this war, both on the battlefield, but also at home and so forth. We talk about Mary and all this, but I can't imagine anyone else being in this role, which kind of brings me to this next question for you, which is, and this is, I know historians hate this ranking thing. I know this, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I'm a fan and I have you here, right? We all got into history because we thought it was cool. So who are your favorite presidents? And I'm not talking about this can be based on your own quirkiness or anything else like that. This doesn't have to be, I agree with their policies and that's why, because inevitably someone will say, but this happened. Who do you like? I mean, when you think about yourselves as scholars, what presidencies are you drawn to when you think about what interests you?
Well, I will say, so I first voted, quote unquote, when I was 8 years old in a 1980 mock election in my elementary school. And I was the only one in my class to vote for Carter. And I was taunted from then on with my classmates calling me Megan Reagan. And I must have divulged that I voted for Carter because it was a secret ballot. I remember that it was. So I must have been I voted for Carter, because what did I know? It was because my parents were voting for Carter, right? So I've always had a kind of soft spot for Carter because he was my first vote. Obviously I was growing up, I didn't really understand much about his actual presidency. He is by far the most excellent ex-president and has had such an amazing impact in his life after holding that office. So I hold a special place in my heart for him. Obama, I think, is one of the only presidents since Lincoln to achieve Lincoln's kind of soaring rhetoric. And I especially felt this because I was writing about Grant for Saving Yellowstone. And I think Grant is an appreciated president, actually.
His reputation's in rehab recently, right?
So to speak. Yes, so to speak. Yes.
Right. Oh, yes. Yeah, I didn't even think with the rehab with that. Oh, man, bad choice of words. Nice job.
There are elements to his presidency that are really interesting. But, I was trying to kind of shoehorn him in as a protagonist in Saving Yellowstone. And in the end, I couldn't do it. I had to demote him to background because the man never wrote one thing that was beautiful or uplifting or interesting. He wrote some things in his private correspondence, but mostly it was so boring. This is a man who uses the newly created Department of Justice to go after the Ku Klux Klan in the South, wielding federal power like no one had done before. And in his State of the Union, you know what he said about it? He was like, oh, and in the South, we're prosecuting the Ku Klux Klan. That was it. There was no we must, protect the rights of the citizens. They must be, there was There was nothing. So I became particularly appreciative of those presidents who, and of course they have speechwriters, and of course, there's all this stuff. But Obama, even though there were parts of his presidency I didn't agree with, like, I still, when I hear him speak, I almost always am like brought to tears. Like, it doesn't even matter what he's talking about. And I think he also, this is why I think the reason we love those scenes in Lincoln with the kids and like the behind the scenes is that same reason that we love all those Pete Souza photographs of him when he's with his cabinet members, or he's talking to people, or he's with kids. Like feeling his hair, or he's pretending to be shot by, Batman, or, whatever it was in the halls. Because you're seeing him as this real human being. And I felt like he is one of those presidents who could actually like speak and encapsulate a moment. But I will stop there and let Lindsay
as a tangent. I had a friend ask me the other day, like, why can't Democrats be more like Obama? And I'm like, are you asking me why we can't have a once in a generation talent more than once in a generation? I don't really have an answer for you there. Okay, so favorite president. So I get asked this question a lot, perhaps unsurprisingly, given the nature of my work. And I split it into two things. So I split it into, if you're asking me who I think the best presidents were, the answers are Lincoln, obviously, and Washington. And I say that Washington doesn't get enough credit because like creating things and knowing when not to say something is far less sexy than winning a civil war, but nonetheless is kind of important. And it turns out, stepping away from power apparently isn't
kind of a big deal. Turns out
isn't a guarantee. So those are I think the best. The most interesting, the ones that I never get tired of reading about, I find endlessly funny and entertaining, largely because of their flaws, are John Quincy Adams and Theodore Roosevelt. John Quincy Adams was so freaking smart. He spoke at least 5 languages by the time he was like 12. He was, a world traveler, a brilliant diplomat, a hilarious diarist. Is that the name? Diary. We'll say diary.
Diarist. No, that's
not right. That's not
Love
right.
that. Incredibly insightful, self-deprecating, really poignant and thoughtful, and just could not figure out how to get along with people sometimes, and was so smart that everyone else just was dumb in comparison. And so he just like could not build a coalition to save his life. And so I just find that very funny. And I really just encourage everyone, if you haven't, to go spend a little bit of time in his diaries, because they are so sharp and witty and cutting about everyone, including himself, which is, I think, one of the things that I appreciate the most, especially when we talk about my love of curmudgeons. He takes the cake. Theodore Roosevelt, there's so much to enjoy. His interest in preservation, his commitment to progressive causes. The man loved animals, had just a menagerie, a zoo at the White House, which I love very much. Loved his children, was incredibly boisterous with them, not unlike Lincoln, sort of like driven by clearly like these demons in a way that he didn't always necessarily know how to deal with, and was kind of like trying to outrun them. There's no presidential speech that I've ever identified with more than the Man in the Arena speech that he gave. It's phenomenal. It's on the wall in my office. I just find him to be such a hilariously compelling character in a way that is utterly impossible to be bored with either of them. That obviously doesn't necessarily mean I think that they are always good people. They did a lot of things that are, kind of cringeworthy from time to time, and JQA could be a very cold husband. He was not always a very nice father. There were a lot of things that Theodore Roosevelt did with race and the hierarchy of races, which are very cringeworthy, but they make for a good story. And if your job is to write stories about people, then they offer a lot of material.
There's at the Harvard Club in New York, there is a drink called the Roosevelt Cappuccino, which, Jason, with your love of coffee, you would enjoy. I think it has 6 shots in it. It has 6 shots.
It will turn you into Theodore Roosevelt. It will turn you into Theodore Roosevelt.
I literally have like a Roosevelt thing over here, and Yeah.
It's as big as your head, and you have to like two-hand it. Like you cannot, you're like a child.
Amazing.
Disclaimer, my coffee love is only from Cuban coffee. It's only recently in the last few years. It's nitrogen, you can see through space-time, which is the only way I was able to finish my dissertation was to drink coffee until I shook enough to where I would accidentally like key in words into the Word doc and then somehow edit them back out, So guys like, TR, they're not perfect. You're looking for somebody perfect. You're really don't go looking for presidents. Don't look. I mean, you're not going to find it in the human experience.
Not anyone, really.
Well, I think that it requires a certain level of ego, masochism, lack of balance to want to be president. Like you kind of got to be a little nuts to want that job, especially now.
Yeah.
I think you got to be a little nuts, but you also have to, and I think the ego can be helpful because you have to believe that you can make these decisions that no one else can make. And so that is essential and important, but also you've got to have like a deep-seated need or ambition that drives you that is difficult to quench and probably doesn't make for a very balanced person, if I had to guess. And I think sometimes the best people, the ones that maybe are the kindest, the ones that are genuinely good humans, don't make for very good presidents.
I think maybe the role of president itself almost makes it almost impossible to have a good president. I mean, I think almost mediocrity might almost be a success whenever I think about the role that people have to have. The job is so hard. You've got to do so many things. There's so many things, frankly, out of your control that, we talk about I think about what I would consider a good president. I can't name a lot of people I would consider good presidents. This guy didn't ruin the country. That's kind of cool, So
yeah, our bar has changed a bit in the past 6 years.
Well, I also think to your point about Grant, there's so much that we don't see that goes on behind the scenes, and our current view is so filtered by our lived experience that we often really can't appreciate how someone was while they were in office. So, I mean, another president that has, I think, is still to a certain extent underappreciated, but like Dwight D. Eisenhower's reputation has only gone up since he left office. Obama's reputation has only gone up. That's partly because of the people that came after him. But we also sometimes just need distance to appreciate how people were in office and assess it with a little bit more clarity.
Well, speaking of which, I want to ask you about your favorite films and books about American presidencies. I know we're running a little low on time. And I want to keep you here all night. I would totally do this. And I was thinking, why am I scheduled an hour and a half for a 3-hour film? Because we could easily go for 6 hours tonight. Not that I'm going to keep you here. When you think about your favorite presidencies, and Lindsay, and I know one of them that you're going to say, I'm pretty sure. What are your favorite films and books about American presidencies?
So I think I'll probably surprise you. My favorite, so I love The West Wing. I was a part of the West Wing generation, and I know that it totally screwed me over for my understanding of politics, but it's just so good. I love the movie The American President. I think we've actually done this one. I mean, I know also not accurate, but so good.
Maybe it's the Martin Chapin for you. He's it's so weird for me to see him as chief of staff in one film and then Bartlett in the other. And it's so the same. It's so weird.
I think it's just, I love the inspirational nature. I love that they appeal to our, better instincts. In terms of books, it's so hard to choose. I love The Age of Eisenhower by William Hitchcock. I think that's a great one. I really like The Man Who Ran Washington, which is by Peter Baker and Susan Glasser. It's not about a president. It's about Jim Baker, but I think it gives a great behind the scenes look at the presidency, and especially in the last decades of the 20th century. And then the Problem with Democracy is about the two Adamses, and I think it is one of the best books about them because it has a sense of humor. And it appreciates their sense of humor. And I think that is often what's lacking in a lot of scholarship, is that they could be grouchy and curmudgeonly, and they had tempers and thin skins, but they were also funny. And they appreciated a good joke, especially a dirty joke. And so I really like that book for that reason.
I will agree on West Wing. I think everybody probably agrees on West Wing.
It's hard not to love it. People ask me favorite president. I'm like,
oh, good.
Well, and
that pilot is like one of the greatest pilots of all time.
And, I think you really only can convey, again, as we were discussing before, the complexity and the richness and the ups and downs of a presidency in a TV series. And, West Wing is from that era when there were 22, 23 episodes a year. Mm-hmm. And, how many years did that show run? Like
seven.
Okay. So it was like 2 terms. It was like 2 full terms of a presidency. Yeah. And that, that's part of its genius, right? Is that you can get down to the nitty gritty. You can have a whole episode on one diplomatic incident because you can, right? Like you can't, you don't just have 2.5 hours to show an entire presidency, from beginning to end. So definitely West Wing. I am a fan of the movie Dave, which,
oh yes.
I mean, not only because it's Kevin Kline and Sigourney Weaver and like, what are you going to do with that? But it's one of those movies that really shows you, and this has come up a couple times in our conversation, like who is really fit to be president, right? Like here's a guy who steps in with no real experience. He's an impersonator, but the president has, had a stroke and they don't want anyone to know. And he goes to these meetings and he has no idea what's happening, but he's effective because he has no idea what's happening. He's not thinking like a politician. He's like, I'm sorry, why are we spending $27 million to make people feel better about their cars? Like, that's just insane. That's one of my favorite lines, like from the entire thing. And he brings in his friend, the accountant, like to like help, And so I really love that movie because I tend to either go like full dystopia with these things. Like I think House of Cards is an incredibly genius show about political maneuvering, although
I stopped watching when it got a little bit too close to reality.
Yes, exactly. But I will say my other favorite, and this is not about the presidency, but Veep is possibly the greatest show about politics ever created. There are still lines from that show that Dan and I kind of quote to each other just randomly, like just because Selena is the perfect politician. Just amazing. And the fact that you never see the president ever it's just a tremendous part of the entire show. And of course, funny from beginning to end. And they're so cruel and awful to each other, which I dearly love. And I'm going to let Lindsay, kind of let her assessment of books about the presidency stand, because those are not usually on my bookshelf unless I have someone very specific to investigate and research like Grant. I don't have the breadth of reading to even be able to tell you.
Well, do you have a favorite of all of the Grant books? Which one do you think is the best?
I like Joan Waugh's book the best, actually, because as a cultural historian, her book, which now I'm blanking on the title of, but it's in the shelf behind me. I could look for it. Her book is partly cultural and partly political, and it's a biography of him basically. And unlike a lot of the previous works on Grant, they either talk about only his military career or his presidency and not both. And she talks about both those things. Plus she talks about his post-presidency and his touring of Europe. And then also his, writing his own memoirs, which by the way, only go up to the end of the war. Like he did not write a memoir about his presidency, I think for good reason, but also to our great frustration, because it would have been fantastic to know all what he was actually thinking. He would have become a major protagonist in Saving Yellowstone had he written the second part of that. If he had lived,
there's a bit of a theme. There's a bit of a theme with this. So both Washington and John Adams kept diaries their entire lives, with the exception of the time that they were presidents.
Interesting.
Kind of important years, guys. Kind of important years.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, we
Come on.
It's reason why, I tell you what, this reason why, I listened to the audiobook of Obama's most recent book, and just to listen to him talk about those experiences, and frankly, I wanted to listen to the audio instead of read it, just so I could hear his inflections and why, I thought that was really important.
He has a good voice.
Yes. Oh God. I miss him so much.
Give me one president we haven't seen a film of that we need to. I want a presidency.
Has there been an Eisenhower movie?
I can't think of one.
Well, I mean, I think that's because a lot of people probably would do the war instead of
the presidency.
But the presidency is, I mean, we got the Truman, we got the Truman stuff on HBO a few years ago. So you would think that there would be a call for Eisenhower as the elder statesman, right?
Yeah. Well, and this is, so I had texted Lindsay and I said, about this question, I may like do some shit stirring because I may be like, do we actually need any more movies about presidents? Do we?
James Garfield.
Well,
I just want another assassination. It's Beard.
Their Twitter account will be very pleased.
Yes, they will.
Their Twitter account's excellent.
I mean, he's super hot, so the casting would be like interesting where that's concerned.
I mean, yeah. He and Rutherford B. Hayes smoke.
I mean, what total smoke show. I would like to see. I mean, it wouldn't be a film about his presidency, but I would love to see a film on the KKK trials of 71, 72. Because, I mean, we have this great tradition of legal battle films. And you would have Grant there. You would have Amos Ackerman as his Department of Justice as Attorney General. You would have all sorts of good roles for lawyers. You would have, excellent roles for witnesses who are coming forward and taking their lives into their own hands to be witnesses in these cases against the KKK. And it's a pretty short time span. It's like November 1871 to April 1872. So like, I think that would be perfect. And I think Jared Harris has been great as Grant, I think, in multiple things. He was Grant in this, and wasn't he Grant elsewhere also?
Yeah.
In maybe the History Channel.
I just think of him as Moriarty.
Oh.
Yeah, Harris was the one guy I didn't think necessarily looked like him, but embodied the spirit of what I thought Grant would feel like. It was like, he was the one guy who was like, he didn't quite look like Grant, but we got the cigar chewing. I was like, okay, I buy it. And so maybe getting back to the idea is like, it doesn't always necessarily have to be exactly so much as you buy into the idea,
Yeah.
That would be great because that's also right around the creation of the Department of Justice too, which is obviously such a pivotal. Okay, but so see, that gets to my argument of why I think more president movies are actually useful. And it's because for better or for worse, they're really powerful figures and their decisions in the moments affect the future of the nation and tell us an awful lot at various moments about who we are and what we are experiencing. So maybe the thing to do is to have movies about them that get at big moments like that one you're talking about, where you use that as a wedge to talk about the use of broader things.
Yes. Well, and I would agree with that. Like, so I'm convinced by that argument. And I would like to see a film like that and not just a film that's like, here's this guy and how great he is, like that, because they can bleed into that. Like sometimes that happens. But if you're forced, also, if it's not a TV series or like a, 2-part History Channel series or whatever, you are actually bound by that, like 2.5 hours or 2-hour time frame. Like you have to be really tight with it. Like you have to really, I mean, the Amistad was like that. I felt like Amistad had that very good blend of like, we are seeing all the actors in play and we're seeing how important politicians are and former politicians and lawyers and like people who are working, for the system that actually makes these decisions and drives change. But then we're also seeing all of the people who brought that to the fore, right? Who like really push things and made things happen.
Is there a good movie on the Little Rock Nine?
No.
I know there are documentaries on it.
Probably not. I don't remember a feature.
Not that I can think of.
Yeah, because that would be
That'd
awesome.
Be another good one.
All right. Well, bringing this all the way back, Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a history movie?
Of course it is.
Okay, so let me give you an example, right? When we first started off HATM, right, that's the obvious. I had to ask this question on Time Bandits the other day, and I'm trying to figure out like what the final question to ask here is. Like, is Time Bandits a history film? And like, sure, why not? Lincoln's obviously a history film, but what is it doing right here? I mean, ultimately, what are we taking away from Lincoln that like Lincoln does better or worse than other history films?
I think it does a great job bringing multiple characters that are revolving around the central figure of Lincoln and provoking him to act, provoking his decision making, and really showing you that dynamic and showing you life in DC on the ground at that moment, the importance of the telegraph, for example, like all of these really interesting nitty gritty historical details that are really grounding the story in place and time. But then also showing you the very, very real relationships that are being navigated in this moment.
I think that as much as possible, given that we know what happens, it does a good job of helping us feel the contingency of actually living through a historical moment of they didn't know what was going to happen and they didn't know the outcome. And so they were just real people doing the best that they could with the information that they had. And it's really hard when we're thinking about people like Lincoln or FDR or Washington or whatever, where most people kind of know the broad strokes of the story to bring that back to life. But it's so essential because that's the interesting stuff, the fact that they didn't know the outcome, but that's actually where I think all of the magic does happen.
Favorite Daniel Day-Lewis performance? I had to ask this one. I wanted to ask you a little earlier because so much of this film turns on this. When you think of Daniel Day-Lewis, what's your film?
God.
He hasn't played God yet.
Well, and I don't think he's going to.
Trying to
hasn't he?
He said he's done.
Yeah, he said he's retired. He's going to be like a cobbler or something.
He's probably making shoes right now. But
I think Lincoln is one of his best performances. He was definitely hottest in Last of the Mohicans, which is, terrible film in many ways, but he was super hot in that film. And I appreciate that in my entertainment.
Well, I think that a running thread with the HATM podcast from here on out is going to be hotness at the movies. Historical hotness.
Yes, the smoke show. I think you should have always a segment in this going forward. Like, who is the smoke show?
Okay, well, did we establish that with the smoke show of the presidencies? Because I said Garfield and then some of you.
Hayes.
Rutherford B. Hayes.
Yes.
Both.
This is not as presidents. Not as presidents when they were young.
Clearly not. But
super hot.
Yeah. Super hot. Both of them. Super hot.
Yeah.
Better than JFK.
And in fact, you see it, you kind of see it and you're like, really? Hayes? And then you're like, oh, that's so, I'm so disappointed in this.
Is this pre-Beard Hayes?
Yes, pre-Beard Hayes. Yeah, pre-beard. Yeah, no, and I never found Jack all that hot, quite frankly.
I think because we know so much about his personal life, I just cannot get that out of my head, and so I'm just like,
yeah. He's just not a beautiful man.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to say,
a young Reagan.
A young Reagan, maybe. And also, I've always been quite enamored of Biden's wolfish grin.
Have you seen the picture of him when he's younger?
He was a handsome guy when he was younger. He's a handsome guy for his age now.
When he was younger, he actually, I'm going to
find it for me and send it to me.
There's a distinct, Rutherford B. Hayes.
Is there a vibe? A Hayes vibe?
Delightful. There's a vibe. There's a vibe.
Delightful.
Well, I'm glad we can narrow this down to the importance of
That's right.
That's right. Was it Franklin?
We can talk about narrative writing.
Yes.
We can talk about history. We can talk about movies, and then we can talk about which presidents are sexy.
Let's talk about the important things.
Yes.
What people really want to get down. Actually, this will be the part people listen to and be like, well, you know what? I need to go find out about Rutherford.
I know. And that'll be their takeaway. They'll be like, wait.
This guy into Reconstruction? What? Right? Like that? All right. Well, good enough. All right.
I'm putting it in the chat right now. I'm putting a picture of young Biden in the chat. It's just so you can see. You got to click on the link. It's an article. But...
Oh, now we're going to have to figure out a way to have to go in the show notes.
Howdy. Nice.
Right?
Yep. Love it.
We'll see who comes up. We'll see who comes up next for the next president, and let's see if we can document that.
Oh, poor Jason. Jason's this was going so well, and now we're veering. Lindsay and Megan are going to get Me Too'd, because we are smoke showing presidents and being.
Let me tell you something.
Sexist.
People don't. This is the low bar content people should be tuning in for. This is the kind of stuff that I've been waiting for people to get into. Anyway, all right. Look, I'll let you guys get out of here. Thank you both so very, very much for coming in. I think we learned a lot about Lincoln and ourselves today.
Yes.
I think we can now enter Smoke Show into the historical register of terminology and figure out like does that go into an appendix?
Yes.
Like in the
it should be one of the categories for the C-SPAN presidential rankings.
The Smoke Show meter, perhaps.
Yeah,
I think that's fair. And I think eventually when we run into like the HATM, like when we get into film production, both of you will be, consultants on, is this person hot enough to be
clearly,
president or not? And like, does this,
we can fill that role for you.
Yeah. We want to be involved in all casting decisions.
Outstanding. That's good. We'll figure something out. It'll be fun when we get to like the Gerald Ford docuseries. Because why not? Like, let's, yeah, absolutely. So, all right, look, thank you both so very much. I can't thank you enough for being here tonight.
Thank you.